Hi, my name is Gabriela Goldberg, and I'm a sophomore, and I go to San Marcos High School. And for my project is called Fecal Matters, Generating Electricity with a Microbial Fuel Cell. And so I built a microbial fuel cell. When I started my project and I was thinking of ideas, I didn't really know what I wanted to do and really what field I wanted to go into. I just knew two things. One, I wanted to challenge myself, and two, I wanted to do something that could potentially better our community. And I think I succeeded in both of those things. So before I start explaining my actual experiment, I just want to explain what a microbial fuel cell is and how it works, just so you guys aren't confused when I explain my actual experiment. A microbial fuel cell is really similar to a battery, but it has one distinguishing characteristic that makes it really special. With a battery, you buy it, you use it, and then when the battery runs out, you have to buy a new one. But with a microbial fuel cell, as long as you have microbes in the fuel cell, and that can come from wastewater, compost, sludge, dirt, anything with bacteria, you can generate electricity potentially forever. And so that has a lot of real-life applications that I'll touch on in a little bit. So how does a microbial fuel cell work? Basically, in day-to-day life, microbes surrender their electrons to oxygen molecules in the air, and that's how they get their energy. But with a microbial fuel cell, we want to alter that path, so we get the energy instead, and we want those electrons, we want that energy. So what we do, if you can see in this device that I have, this container holds the wastewater, and I've blocked it off completely from any oxygen. It's completely sealed off, and there's putty sealing any cracks. So that means that the microbes can't surrender their electrons to oxygen molecules anymore, because there are none. So the microbes have to surrender their electrons to something else, and that's why we use an electrode. I don't know if you can see in here, but the electrode basically consists of a square of carbon felt and a wire. And the carbon felt is just so the microbes can latch onto it, and they surrender their electrons to that wire. The electrons travel through the wire from the container holding the wastewater to a container that's called the cathode, and that holds a conductive saltwater solution. This is pretty similar to a battery. If you were to look at a battery, it has a flat side and a side that sticks out a little bit. The flat side is called the anode, and that's the negative side, and the side that sticks out is called the cathode, and that's the positive side. That's the same thing here. The side that holds the wastewater is the anode, the negative side, and the side with the conductive saltwater solution is the cathode, or the positive side. So we have electrons flowing from the anode to the cathode. We also need a flow of H+ ions, or protons, and so that's why we have the proton exchange membrane, which is just a fancy term for a salt bridge. And how I built the salt bridge is I just boiled together some water, salt, and agar, and I poured it into this PVC pipe, let it cool overnight, and when it cooled, it formed a almost jello-like solution. And so the wastewater couldn't pass through it because it was too thick, and the salt water couldn't pass through it, but protons can pass through it. So now there's a flow of electrons and a flow of protons. And although the anode is blocked off from oxygen, the cathode is constantly supplied with oxygen from an air pump. So now we have protons, electrons, and oxygen. And that completes the circuit, and that's how we get the electricity from the fuel cell. So for my project, my question was, how does the type of wastewater used in a microbial fuel cell affect the average output voltage produced? And so I used 3 different types of wastewater: confluent wastewater, primary treatment wastewater, and secondary treatment wastewater. I'll try and hold up a picture. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it up close, but if you look in this picture here, the wastewater on the far left is the darkest one. That's the confluent wastewater. And that's the wastewater right as it comes into Elistero treatment plant. It's undergone no treatment at all. It's basically exactly what you guys have flushed down the toilet. And so it has a very high concentration of bacteria in it. Next, it's still super dark and still has a lot of bacteria. That's primary treatment wastewater. And so that's gone under physical treatment. So that means it's gone through the screens and the grit chambers. But it still has a lot of bacteria because it hasn't undergone chemical treatment. Lastly is secondary treatment wastewater. And you can see it's almost clear. That's because it's undergone chemical treatment. And so a lot of the bacteria has been removed. And actually, secondary treatment wastewater is so clean that Elistero treatment plant is allowed to flush that into the ocean because that's such a low concentration of bacteria. Lastly, my control group was using just pure filtered water, which obviously, as you know, has a low concentration of bacteria. My hypothesis was that the device with the confluent wastewater, or the dirtiest wastewater, would have the highest average output voltage simply because it has the highest concentration of bacteria. I had 3 trials, and so that means I had 3 devices with confluent wastewater, 3 with primary, 3 with secondary, and 3 control groups. And after testing each device for 2 weeks and measuring the voltage every day, I found that my hypothesis was wrong. I was partly right in that the secondary treatment wastewater and the confluent wastewater generated little to no electricity because they had a low concentration of bacteria, around 50 to 100 millivolts, which is a very small amount of electricity. But I found that the primary treatment wastewater generated up to 126 millivolts more than the confluent treatment wastewater, and I was shocked by this because everything that I had researched upcoming to my project was that if you have more bacteria, then you'll have more energy and a higher output voltage. And so I didn't really know why something that had been treated and something with a lower concentration of bacteria would have such a higher amount of electricity. So I contacted someone named Bruce Logan, who's a professor at Penn State, and he's basically the leader across America for studying microbial fuel cells. And when he got back to me, he said that the confluent wastewater, or the wastewater right as it comes in, just might have been too dirty. There's so much dirt and there's so much material aside from the bacteria in the confluent wastewater that it limited the bacteria's ability to surrender their electrons. They couldn't do their job as well as the bacteria in the primary treatment wastewater. And so that's why I think the primary treatment wastewater did such a better job at having the microbes surrender their electrons and generating a higher output voltage. Overall, I think that although my hypothesis was wrong, I still think my experiment was successful because I proved everything I wanted to prove. First, I proved that microbial fuel cells are very easy to build and that they have very applicable real-life applications. Secondly, I proved that they're very cheap and efficient. I have a table here and it shows that one microbial fuel cell only took $5.50 to build. And although that is more expensive than a battery, keep in mind that this was with cheap drugstore materials and that you can use this forever. Secondly, wastewater is something that has little to no value in our modern society. A battery is very expensive, but wastewater is something that we don't generally give any value. Same with dirt, compost, or sludge. So now we're taking something with little to no value that we literally flush down our toilets and we can power someone's house with this. So in the future, I would definitely like to study microbial fuel cells more and try and create a microbial fuel cell that is not only cheaper, but more efficient so it can be applied to real life, used not only in first world countries. For example, we could use microbial fuel cells scaled up and we could put them at wastewater treatment plants so they could potentially power themselves. Or we could use them in developing countries where people who may not be able to power their homes at night can now do so. And so, again, although my hypothesis was technically incorrect, I still think my experiment was successful, and I'm looking forward to seeing microbial fuel cells in day-to-day life in the future. Thank you.
Yeah. So how do they scale up? Like how big would a microbial fuel cell power a house?
So there's a couple answers to that. First, you can use a capacitor to get more voltage out of a microbial fuel cell, even if you don't scale it up. A capacitor, for those of you who don't know, basically it just stores energy until you have enough that you want to use. So although this technically only generated 600 millivolts, you could use a capacitor until you had a higher voltage, and then you could use that to power something. And also, you can scale up the microbial fuel cells, I guess, as large as you would want, because really the only thing is if you have more bacteria, then you'll have a higher output voltage, as my experiment proved, for the most part. And so if you just scaled it up with larger containers and more bacteria, then you would potentially have a higher output voltage. Also, if I were to make this microbial fuel cell more efficient, for example, using platinum wire instead of copper wire and other things like that, that could potentially generate a higher voltage also. Any other questions? Thank you.
Very good. So in about 10 years, we're going to have to go to the bathroom to recharge our car.
Here you go, Gabriela. Congratulations. And,
I was shocked. Oh my God. She said that.
Salute. All right. Okay. Keep up the good work.